Dr. Wilhelm Bohr, he is the former chairman of Niels Bohr Archive and adjunct professor at University of Copenhagen, and moreover, he is the grandson of Nobel laureate Niels Bohr.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you for having me at this very exciting meeting. I have looked at the schedule and it seems very interesting. I wish I could be there with you in Calcutta. I have been to India on 2 visits, and I have visited many institutions in India, but not made it to Calcutta yet. So I would love to come there someday. What I'm showing here is some slides of my grandfather Niels Bohr to give a little perspective on his background and his personality. And then I have a few slides directed at his interactions with Indian scientists, material that we have in the Niels Bohr archive. But I like to talk about many aspects of his work, also with the effort he made during the war, but there will not be time for that today. So I like to develop this around his many very close friends and associates that he worked with. And here are some acknowledgments, and also acknowledgement to my father, Ove Bohr, who was helping me putting many of these interesting pictures together from the history of Niels Bohr's life. So Niels Bohr was born in 1885 in Copenhagen. And here are some important things, aspects about his life, some important dates and things that I would like to also emphasize. An important event was that he married Margrethe Nørlund in 1912. And that was just before the discovery of the atomic model in 1913. And in 21, he started the Niels Bohr Institute. And we at the Niels Bohr Archive are housed at the Niels Bohr Institute and work very closely with the scientists, the physicists at the Niels Bohr Institute. Then in 22, he got the Nobel Prize. In 25, there were these interesting debates with Einstein that is very fascinating. And there's a lot of correspondence between the two and famous discussions at various meetings between Einstein and Bohr. In 1932, he moved to a mansion donated by the Carlsberg breweries that I'll talk a little about. And then he became president of the Danish Royal Academy of Sciences, where he remained one of the most, probably the longest serving president of the Royal Academy of Sciences. I'm a member of that academy, and he's still very appreciated for his leadership in that role. And then we had many interesting events during the war, famously the Heisenberg meeting, and then the Manhattan Project. And then in 1950, he wrote the open letter to the United Nations. And I know my sister mentioned that. That became an important document in later meetings that have been held about an open world, and relates also to the things that I just heard you discussed. And he died in 1962. And I am a member and past director of the Niels Bohr Archive here, which is a small institution at the Niels Bohr Institute. And you know maybe Finn Åserud and Christian Joas and Rob that just spoke to you the other day. And in this archive, there's a lot of materials we have from not only Niels Bohr, but many other physicists. And you can find it here, and you can search for things that you're interested in. And of course, one of the key things that we're focused on is that how could we learn from this enormous success of the Bohr Institute in the 20s? What was the underlying elements that made it such a big center, an important center in physics, training so many important people that then went on to do work in their countries where they came from. We can count probably 32 Nobel laureates were trained there. So we have a lot of interest in understanding the environment of that institute. Why was it such a big success? Here's a picture that very probably is very well known to you from the old Auditorium A which still exists, and we still have lectures right there, and some of the famous disciples of Niels Bohr and Heisenberg, Pauli, Gamow, Landau, and Kramers. And this is a very historical place that we still use. So one of the aspects was, of course, Niels Bohr's personality. And I think he had some very unusual, very strong aspects of his personality that helped a lot in all this effort. He was, of course, a brilliant physicist with great insight into physics and major discoveries. But he had this openness. He was open to all kinds of ideas. He liked to be challenged. He liked for people to ask daring questions. And this openness was also showed up in his role in politics after the war, trying to connect the different partners after the war, the different countries after the war that had fought each other. And he had this very profound feeling about openness that has also then come up in many meetings about an open world that follows this idea, really. He was a very humble person. He always liked to get credit to the others in a project or in many other aspects. And he had a very good sense of humor. He liked to tell jokes. He liked to deflate important situations, difficult situations in science and politics with humor. And then he also was a very physically and mentally strong person who could work for many hours and concentrate. And I will return to that I think one of the things I remember about him is that he was able to fully concentrate on whatever he was doing, whether it was physics or whether it was playing with the kids. He had that very strong ability. His father was Christian Bohr, which he was a well-known physiologist at the University of Copenhagen. He had two siblings, and Christian Bohr was also well-known in physiology for discovering something called the Bohr effect of the binding, study the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin, transport in the blood. So he had already grew up in a very academic environment. And Christian Bohr was in the Academy of Sciences, had many friends, and I think that it's very clear that his connection to broad sciences in Denmark played a very big role in Niels Bohr and Harald Bohr both deciding to become scientists. So Niels Bohr became a physicist, and his brother Harald here became a mathematician. And Harald was a little younger than Niels. They were very close. Friendship and always we have some wonderful historical communication between the two brothers just up to and after the discovery of the atom in 1913, and they remained friends all throughout their lives. And Harald was an outstanding mathematician in his own right, and he was also an outstanding soccer player. And here's a picture of a soccer team with Harald and Niels Bohr here that were playing soccer, and that was inspired by their father, Christian Bohr, who was a member of one of the founding members of this club. And Harald Bohr went on to play on the Danish national team of soccer, and in 1902, he was on the team that beat France 17-1. That is still an Olympic record. So there are many funny stories about Niels and Harald and their friendship, and including also this soccer stuff. So a very important event for Niels was that he found Margrethe Bohr and married her. And this is a famous picture from their engagement. And she became very important, played a very important role in Niels Bohr's career and life. And I personally am very interested in her role and have done some research and continue to research about that and talk to many others about it, because it's very clear that she was very had a very deep, she had a understanding of science. She had a good understanding of people. She was, like, they talked about her being the mother for many of the foreign students that came. She helped with so many aspects of running the laboratory and the Niels Bohr Institute, arranged parties, and you'll see later participated in so many things. Here they are together. This is a picture I have hanging here, right here in my room. And they were also commemorated on this slide. So it was well known that they were a very good team on this stamp. And they were, it was a well-known thing that they were a very strong team in terms of many, many aspects of life. So then they had 5 sons. That was pretty unusual. And the sons all grew up to be, some were scientists like my father, and there was a lawyer and engineer and doctor. And that was a big family that grew up to be a big family that still remains in touch. So an important event. So this mansion is where they moved in 1932, and it was a very special situation in Denmark because the brewer of Carlsberg beer, Jacobsen, he had built this wonderful house in the middle of Copenhagen and decided to donate it to a scientist who was to be appointed by the National Academy of Sciences. And so Niels Bohr and his wife moved there and lived there for 30 years in this wonderful building. And it was marble inside, beautiful stairs, beautiful garden. And that became a very important place for them to invite guests and to entertain and to have meetings and to have family. And as children, it was very special, of course, to visit this wonderful place. So in the house, there was many beautiful rooms. Here is the dining room with a Greek statue here and this beautiful candelabra here over as lighting in the room. And they used this to invite people from the Institute on common occasions every year, many times a year, in this place. And it was a wonderful place for scientists to get together, a family to get together. And I remember some enormous parties that we had there. And we as children were invited to walk around and talk to people. Here is my grandmother, Margrethe, and Niels Bohr here entertaining at one of these big events there. It was really nice. And at the same time, Margrethe Bohr was interested in many things, including this picture where she is taking care of plants in the garden. There were gardeners to help, but she took a very significant interest in the maintenance of the beautiful gardens around there. This place is now a park in the city of Copenhagen, and it's still co-sponsored by the Carlsberg Foundation. And so through this connection to having this house and Niels Bohr's important role in the society, they became close to or friendly with the royal family and many other people in the leadership in Denmark. They were often invited to important events. Here is an event where Niels Bohr arrives at the Royal Palace in 1955. And also he was then took the opportunity to invite important people from around the world and leaders to come to Carlsberg and visit. And this was co-sponsored then by the Danish foreign foreign service, who used him also to help promote aspects of Denmark. And here's a nice picture of Niels Bohr and Ben Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel and who was very interested in science. And they apparently had several meetings that discussing aspects of science and became quite good friends, Ben-Gurion here. And there are a number of other people that were there. Here is Heisenberg, who is well known to you, of course. Here is the King of Denmark visiting the house, and then also other kinds of not scientists, people, musicians, entertainers. Here's Louis Armstrong visiting Carlsberg. And here's another occasion where he met with Eisenhower visiting to get the Ford Foundation Prize. One of the most exceptional visits was this one here by Queen Elizabeth in 1957. And here is the Queen, here's Niels Bohr, and this is the Queen of Denmark, Ingrid. This is the King of Denmark, Frederik, and my grandmother. This here is Prince Philip from the UK, and this here is Avi Nielsen, who was the director of the Carlsberg Brewery. And she came to visit for a short visit to the house, the mansion. Here is the garden, and you see here the amount of security, 2 policemen. That was all at that time. Can you imagine nowadays the security for such a visit? And I was there, standing there looking at the Queen coming here with some family members. We were very impressed with this. I was allowed to give the Queen a flower, and we were all following this very closely, myself and my uncle here, my aunt here, and Barbara Jessen, who was a mathematician. As I mentioned, Niels Bohr was had this ability to concentrate, and here we are playing a little bit of soccer with him, football. And he was, as I mentioned, had played that in his youth, but we were not expecting him to run around too much, but he did show a lot of interest in playing with kids. And again, what was exceptional about this was that when he played with us, you felt his full concentration on playing with us. It wasn't like he was distracted by thinking about other things. And that was unusual because I've known so many physicists in my life, and many of them would be distracted by thinking about other things while they were playing with us, or nowadays picking up the phone while they're playing with their kids or something like that. Niels and Margrethe did a number of global big trips in traveling together, and Margrethe went along with Niels Bohr on this very famous trip in 1937, where they went from to the US, to Japan, to China, and Russia. And they spent about 3 months on this trip, probably a little more actually, and this is a long time for Margrethe to be away, but she took the trip with Niels and participated in all of these events along the way. And the oldest son at the time was Hans. The very oldest had unfortunately died. He came along on this trip. And there's a book about this written that's more of a family book. It was a fantastic trip. They experienced so many things. And Niels Bohr gave like 8 lectures in Japan, for example, lectures all over the place. But interestingly, the president there of Tohoku University came to my grandmother and said it was so fascinating with these 8 lectures. And what was very special was they were all very different and all very interesting, he said. So then I have a few things to say about this relation to India, and it starts with this letter from Raman to Niels Bohr in 1935. And it was interesting for me because I was a guest of the Academy of Sciences of India 3 years ago, and my wife and I went to Bangalore to Institute of Science there. And so we spent the first part of our visit staying there at the university and had some very interesting experiences giving lectures and exchanges with the students and faculty at ICI there. But this letter was written from Raman to Niels Bohr, and it was the start of the Indian Academy of Sciences. And so here he says, it was felt that the association of select body of distinguished scientific workers outside India with the academy would be of great advantage considered from every point of view. And the council of the academy have accordingly taken power to elect 30 eminent scientists from outside India as honorary fellows of the academy. And subject to your acceptance, your name hasn't been included in this list. This was the start of the Indian Academy of Sciences. And he further said that there will be no obligations on your part, but it was a very kind letter from Raman. And in return, Niels Bohr says here a little later that he would be very pleased to be a member of the Academy of Sciences honorary fellowship. And he writes a very nice letter to Raman and says that he will be visiting. He talks about the trip in 37 here, where he's going to Japan and other places, and he says he would like to visit India in one of the following years. And of course, very nice, as they always did, kindest greetings also to Lady Raman. And then we have this correspondence here that relates to his visits, which was in Bombay at the time, now Mumbai. And here we have a letter I've heard from our Prime Minister, Nehru, that you're coming to India. I write this to welcome you not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of the government and people of West Bengal and the University of Calcutta. So I thought this was relevant to your meeting in Calcutta here. It's a matter of great pride for us that you'll be able to find time to visit West Bengal during your brief visit to India. This was in 1959. And so we have here the response from Niels Bohr to Jai Naidu, the governor of West Bengal, and he has a kind response and says that he would like to visit that. He says, "We are most treasured remembrance of all that you showed us from the trip, beautiful, impressive dance performance to the morning excursion where we met your chief minister, Dr. Roy, and saw the Gandhi Memorial on the river. And I need not add that I always, with gratitude, think about your most beautiful address at the convocation ceremony in Calcutta University. We both hope that we shall someday have the pleasure of meeting you again, and so forth. As a greeting from our country and as a small token of gratitude, we are sending you a little silver tray made by Georg Jensen, very famous Danish artist." So here is a picture of Nehru visiting in Carlsberg, the mansion that I mentioned, and that was in 1958. And he comes along here with visiting. My grandmother is here, my aunt is here, so he's here visiting on this trip. And on this trip, he also visited the Danish high energy station of Risør, which was headed by Niels Bohr. This was after the war. Denmark was not interested in developing atomic nuclear weapons and was very much against nuclear energy in general, but they managed to have a high energy station here in Risør that at the time was a big center for these efforts, and later led to many other efforts in Europe that Niels Bohr was very active in CERN and so forth. And here is Nehru visiting on that trip here also, Risør, Denmark. And there's here, this is a typical sort of way that Niels Bohr would explain physics. He would have his fingers like this and look at his fingers, and other people had to try to follow his explanation of atoms. And here is a minister of a Danish leading minister of the government. Here's another picture, which I guess was at the visit that Niels Bohr had in Bombay here with Nehru. And because I think he later came back to Bombay, and that's where this happened here. And here's that's in Bombay with Margrethe Bohr and Nero again in 1960. So I guess I'm done showing some things here, and I'd be glad to take any questions you might have for a few minutes, or if there's anything else you would like me to show. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bohr. With your presentation, we got to know various aspects of Niels Bohr that I am sure, like me, most of us didn't know about before.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this beautiful memoir on Niels Bohr. I've been to the Copenhagen Institute and was very inspired. I have a question about the nature of personal relations between Einstein and Niels Bohr subsequent to the Niels Bohr-Einstein dialogues. I've always been curious, did they continue to remain good friends, or did the difference in the physics outlook towards quantum mechanics ever strain their relations to some degree? This is not something that's
Yeah.
brought out in the biographies, but maybe I want to know how they related to each other as time went by. Thank you.
Yeah, they related very well to each other. They became good friends and had very considerable mutual respect. So even though they had these discussions, they were, of course, they became very friendly, and we have some nice correspondence from Heisenberg to Bohr, which shows his respect for Bohr and which shows the friendship they had right before they both received the Nobel Prize in 1922, because Einstein's was delayed because of the war. So they had a very good, very nice relationship. After the discussions, it developed to a very deep mutual respect and a very nice relationship. I might be able to find, I'm just looking at my slides, I have this very nice, so we have in the Niels Bohr archive some a large amount of correspondence between Einstein and Bohr. This is an example here of a letter written by Einstein when he was traveling back from Japan, and it was just in 1922, I believe it was. So then here is a translation of it. So it was in 23 actually. So just after that, so he talks very nicely, dear or rather beloved Bohr here, and it's a very nice letter showing this deep respect that they developed after the original debates that were very interesting in themselves. So saying here they were looking forward to seeing each other in Stockholm for the Nobel Prize. You're admiring Albert Einstein here. So we have some correspondence that clearly shows this friendship they developed.
Thank you, Dr. Bohr. Yes, Professor Holm.
Hello. I wanted to ask you in later years about the relationship between Heisenberg and Bohr, because after their famous discussion of 1941 and during the role in the Second World War, what impact it had on their personal relationship? Do you remember anything?
Well, I have studied that a lot and talked to my grandmother about it. And actually, when I was giving a talk about Niels Bohr in Bangalore, it mainly focused on this whole story between the two. So very clearly in the 1941 meeting, as is also displayed in Michael Frayn's play Copenhagen, there was considerable hostility. And for many years after the war, my grandmother felt that hostility still to the Heisenberg, but my grandfather, Niels Bohr, approached him after the war, and they had some discussions again, and there was some friendliness. Nevertheless, he had decided at an early stage to write to Heisenberg and explain how deeply unhappy he was with the fact that Heisenberg worked for the Germans, probably was involved seriously in the German nuclear projects, and also at the same time didn't understand the role of Niels Bohr. And so he drafted these letters and never sent the letters. And some years after his death, we found these letters of correspondence where he actually expressed anger towards Heisenberg for what he did during the war. So, in other words, it was a complex story, but also very clear that while they had a deep friendship and of course, deep connection in physics, this still was unacceptable to Niels Bohr that Heisenberg would go and work with the Germans and try to develop the atomic weapons.
Thank you, Dr. Bohr.
Thank you for having me.